Nana was so strong. She kept, this hard breathing. She just breathed and she breathed, and the heart that had pumped through so many years kept going. And Zoe said to me, do you think it would be inappropriate to watch a movie on the computer? And I said, this is what Nana bought a DVD at like 80, I think, and bought them DVDs. Said, well, what movies do you all like? And she did this early. She was an early adopter, so that she could sit in bed with my children and watch, Fried Green Tomatoes and Mary Poppins and anything they loved, right? So I said, Nana would love it if you were watching a movie, because so.
So what movie did you watch? Welcome to the Permission to Heal podcast. I am Marcy Brockman. Together, we will discover what brings us healing, meaning, and true joy. You only need your own permission to begin. Okay, welcome, Lorene Cary. So nice to meet you. Welcome to Permission to Heal.
Thank you. It's great. I love your title. I'm very glad to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, it was sort of born out of my own healing journey. I had been writing a lot in, I want to say like 2014, 2015. I was writing some stuff like for Elephant Journal online magazine. And I remember I was trying to figure out how to describe how I felt about my life, because I didn't really feel like I was living my life. I felt like my life was living me, Yeah. And I felt like I was having these out of body experiences all the time. Like I was watching myself going through the motions, doing the mom thing, doing the teacher thing, doing the, caretaker thing. Like I felt like I was endlessly circling an airport, like I was an airplane, endlessly circling an airport, waiting for permission to land. Like I couldn't land in my own life.
Yes.
And so that's where that came from. And my own memoir, what became called Permission to Land. And I was thinking about calling it 14 Other Things. And my husband just looked at me and he's like, you're an idiot. It's called Permission to Land. That's what it's called. That was the whole impetus for the whole thing anyway. And then almost exactly a year ago, I had this heavenly epiphany to start a podcast. And I knew as soon as I had the idea, I knew exactly that it should be called Permission to Heal. That's right. Because of that same thing. We're talking about transformative stories and sharing our narratives and sharing our experiences, because together we can make sense out of it, hopefully, and hold each other's hands as we walk toward healing. So, that's the point.
That's the point.
So welcome to the Permission to Heal family, Lorene.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for that permission. I love it because permission isn't only something that is granted once.
No, of course not.
Right? Like you have to keep giving yourself permission.
Yeah, I think we forget. We're creatures of habit. At least I can only speak for myself. I forget. I'm a creature of habit. I get used to doing things a certain way. And I have to remember, okay, you have to give yourself permission to close the computer and do nothing for an hour or go play. And not that I remember what that's like, but I'm trying to remember what that's like, And I think too many of us think that permission to do whatever the thing is that we're looking to do has to come from a source external to us.
Outside, and it will come from outside, and it will only come later. Yeah.
Right. But that's not true, because at any given moment, we have the power to do it ourselves.
Yeah.
I keep thinking of that song. I don't know who sings it. I've got the power. You know that song?
That's right.
Like that just runs through my head.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So, when Ladysitting came across my newsfeed, I should say, I was really captivated by the title, Ladysitting, My Year with Nana at the End of Her Century. And I was just captivated by the whole concept of that. I had a very I'm going to let you talk about your book because that's what we're here to do. And I want to learn from you and hear it from you. But I had a very poignant and beautiful end of life experience with my own grandmother. And she, sort of like your Nana, would not hear of moving out of her house. She would not hear of moving into either of her daughter's houses. That was not an option. She wanted her own autonomy. And so we had to hire a home healthcare worker to live with her. So my mom could do her thing and my aunt could do her thing. And I was newly married with little babies. And I lived an hour away. So what was I going to do? And this woman, Lana, became like the third sister to my mom and my aunt, and really took such good care of my grandmother. And the day, we saw her deteriorating a few months before she decided to go. And then that morning, Lana called us all and said, you have to come. Today's the day. She's in some way preparing to die. We can see it. And my mom and my aunt and I just sat in the room with her for hours, and she was unresponsive. We could tell that she was hearing us, but she wasn't saying anything. Her eyes were closed. And we were like holding her hands and her feet in a circle, just the three of us. And then she just left. And it was so peaceful and beautiful and poignant and sad, but beautiful and joyous and loving, and like everything all mixed together. It was just beautiful. Anyway, so when I saw the title, I'm like, oh my God, I have to talk to this woman.
I'm glad.
So you're here, and you are a Philadelphia, Pennsylvania resident. I think you've always been in Philadelphia. Is that true?
Most of my life. I went away to work for a while. I went to school in England. I went to school in New Hampshire.
Okay.
Like that. But then I came back. I lived in New York for a little bit and worked at Time Magazine early.
Right. I remember that.
Right.
I remember that.
But I came back, to Philly.
Beautiful. So would you tell us a little bit about you, a little about your life, a little about who Lorene Cary is and who she was growing up, and maybe touch a little bit upon how the nature of your relationship with Nana and how close you were, or what she taught you? I mean, it's a lot of questions all at once, but
Sure. As you're talking, I almost want to just read a little section about my childhood with her, because that is more articulate than I can be. But I grew up here in Philadelphia. I went to her house like so many people did with their grands most weekends for years and years and years. Nana and Pop, her second husband, lived in New Jersey, so it was just over the bridge.
Right.
And they were, it felt like luxury. It felt like it was wonderful. Can I just read a little section?
You do whatever you want. We're here to celebrate Lorene Cary. I'm good.
Great. Why was it that weekends at Nana Jackson's felt like a world apart? Maybe because dressed in old ball gowns, I traveled with the sun patch across the floor of the suburban New Jersey neo-colonial and soaked in more light and luxe than my parents' West Philadelphia apartment could ever offer. Delight and time, the wide-armed, fragrant mimosa to climb in summer, the fireplace to stoke in winter, choices all the day long, whatever your little heart desires. Yes, I knew I was being spoiled. That word that obsessed Black grown-ups and even kids. What could be worse than to be spoiled? You spoiled could get you a corrective beat down fast. Besides, everybody needs to respect authority, learn limits, above all, know that older people valued you, blah, blah, blah. I knew myself to be a wimp, a failure in the toughness category, which was why I went insane with terror at the sound of my mother coming for me, or my father reaching for the threatened, though seldom used, belt. If a kid down the street got a beating, and in our cheek by jowl row houses, we heard every single one, I'd be good for a month. So believe you me, I knew good and well that my whole Nana deal was off the charts, spoiling, which was why with peers, I kept it to myself. What happened in West Collingswood stayed in West Collingswood.
I loved that passage.
So,
Gosh, so evocative. Oh my God.
so that was my younger childhood.
Yeah.
My sister was not born until I was 8 years old, and then the two of us went sort of regularly. By that time, I think Nana was probably out of the baby business, so I did a lot of caring for Carol, which I loved. She was like a living doll baby. It was great fun. I went to boarding school on a scholarship in New England when I was almost 16. And I think that changed my life. Not I think, it did.
Yeah.
I was out of the house. And I
Much
never
more autonomous than an ordinary 16-year-old would be.
Right. And the autonomy also came from doing a change of culture, class, lifestyle. I felt a little bit like sometimes immigrant children who speak English better than their parents do. Mm-hmm. Right. I was having a better education than anyone in my family ever had. They were so proud of me. They wanted me to do things. They wanted me to have all these opportunities. But in a way, I stepped sort of away from the family. I was not with them all the time. Right. And I went on to work. I did various, but that the nugget of that relationship stayed with me all my life. I was deeply, it was important to me that my children also have a relationship with her. So we continued. I still went there once a week all through my adult life. I took the children there. She took them overnight, even though she was really very old. She insisted. Nice. And they loved it. They loved it.
They
so
did.
We had, these generations.
She got to spoil another generation of family.
Exactly. Yeah. And in different ways. One of the things I write at the end is about Zoe, my daughter, asking whether it would be okay, whether it was inappropriate, as you said, you'd been there all day with your grandma. We had been there all day. It was just Zoe and me by this point. Everybody else had left because they had to go home. They had to let dogs out and do various things. Nana was so strong. She kept, this hard breathing. She just breathed and she breathed, and the heart that had pumped through so many years kept going. And Zoe said to me, do you think it would be inappropriate to watch a movie on the computer? And I said, this is what Nana bought a DVD at like 80, I think.
Right.
So, or what was it called? DVR.
On the
DVR
TV
machine, right. Yeah. And play and bought them DVDs. Said, well, what movies do you all like? And she did this early. She was an early adopter, so that she could sit in bed with my children and watch, fried green tomatoes and Mary Poppins and anything they loved, right? So I said, Nana would love it if you were watching a movie So
what movie did you watch? Do you remember?
This is really terrible. I always forget the movie.
Okay.
And then I text my daughter and I say, if you tell me this time, I won't forget, I promise. So I wrote into the book, I forgot the movie, but it's a movie that has to do with race in the South. And
well, that narrows it down.
It's satire, it's something, but it was so funny because Nana lived her life, Nana from North Carolina had lived this life. Her father had been a secretary for the last Black congressman from North Carolina for 90 years.
Wow.
1902, I think, Jim Crow had finally succeeded in North Carolina to the point where there were not enough Black voters left.
Yeah.
Who would vote this man, this
whole
Black congressman named George White.
His constituency was dissolved.
Right. And no, and no one else would vote for him, even though he had been a good congressman. Right. So from 1902 to 1992, there was no Black congressperson from North Carolina. And from 1902 for at least 20 years, there was no Black congressperson in Congress at all. He was the last Black congressperson. Yeah.
That's devastating.
That's something. And this is history we forget. And then when things happen, we say, oh, how could that happen? Well, so Nana's father and her uncle both acted as secretaries for this man. They were the inheritors of land from a free colored man, their father named Napoleon. But by the time George White left, and he gave this great speech, he said that you're seeing the last of the Negro in government, but he will rise again phoenix-like someday. And when Barack Obama came in,
I remember you saying that. Yes,
he quoted that to the Black congressional caucus.
He's the phoenix.
He was like a phoenix. But after all that happened, they decided that they could not live like full men. You know, there was the poll tax, there was the end of the fusion party. There was a little moment where in the Republican Party, they called it fusion. They had African Americans, white Americans, middle class, poor people, and they fused into a Republican Party in North Carolina. The Democrats broke that up, talked to people, pulled people off, divide and conquer. And they decided to move to Philadelphia because they felt like they could not be, in their own words, we cannot be men anymore in North Carolina.
I get that.
Yeah. So that's how she came to Philadelphia. And the fact that Zoe was watching this satire about race in the South, it just
Seems
felt
fitting.
like, yeah.
Very cyclical.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. Now, you didn't find out about this history of your grandfather and your great grandfather or whatever until Nana told you about this later in her life. Am I right, or am I misreading that?
I didn't find out about a lot of the specifics until I wrote this book.
Oh, that's how late it was. Okay.
Was that late?
Research. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you didn't know that you'd come from a long line of activists, of people who were politically involved and on the pulse of things. You didn't know that until then.
I didn't really know that, because my sense was that after his generation, that what happened in her generation was they put their heads down and tried not to lose everything.
Right.
So they stopped. They did not continue it as some families did. Rather, they sort of backed off. But when we would drive down to the shore, the Jersey Shore, from Philadelphia, we always passed. It was a little city town called Whitesboro, right before Wildwood, and Nana would always say, "Now my father worked with the man that place is named after."
Oh, Whitesboro was named after George White.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I didn't know that. But so that she just said just that much. When I started writing, she said, "Well, you must have gotten your writing talent from my father, because he wrote political speeches and things." Well, later I found out that George White was the first person ever to introduce a bill against lynching into the US Congress.
Wow.
Did Bill Higgins write that? I don't know. But the
Maybe.
language of it is very flowery, and his newspaper articles were very flowery.
Oh, well, could
Very.
be.
Could be.
Could be. Writing style could be like handwriting. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. So, it makes sense that if Nana's father lost everything like that,
Mm-hmm.
that she would then cling to the things that she clung to, her home and her businesses, like you said, with claw marks,
Right.
And not want to let anything go, not relinquish a bit of control.
No.
I can understand that.
Right. She also, there was that culturally, politically, and in the family history, there were also reasons for it psychologically. Her mother died when she was 6. She never got beyond that. So in the book, I'd like to tell this one story. She always told. She told a few stories, thumbnails, few details, but over and over. These were her stories. One was about, from the time I was little, she loved dolls, and she made them and taught me to make them. When the book came out, by the way, my cousin and another cousin pulled out of their attics dolls that I had made them.
Wow.
As a middle school or teenager.
And you'd probably long forgotten about them.
Long forgotten. But there was a thing that now, this is what you do for little girls. You make. And she always told me the story about how her mother had sent her out into the fields in North Carolina to go bring back cotton to stuff into this doll for her.
Wow, cool.
And it was a lovely story, and they did raise cotton and then later, I spent a lot of my life in the 19th century, right? I wrote novels about a woman escaping from slavery, I did a lot of research into the 19th century.
Right.
When cotton sets bowl, and I've seen it, it pops open, that little bud pops open, and just as your hand would open and you see the tops of your fingers, each of those enclosing the ball of cotton is sharp.
Yeah.
One has to learn how to pick it so that you
can pull it out between the points so you're not cutting yourself.
Right.
So how did Nana as a little girl do that without hurting herself?
Right. And the fact is they did hurt themselves, and they just they just got bruised or cut and got used to it. Would the wife of a free man or a wealthy man, even if she had a lot of children, right? Nana was the 4th of 5 children. Mm-hmm. And Lizzie, who was her mother, was pregnant probably when this story is told. Would this person have sent? They wouldn't have sent this child out into the field by herself. It
doesn't seem likely.
No, but that's how Nana remembered it. So that story was very important to her to hold on to a few of those stories. And she used to say, she had this phrase she always used, which was, well, is everything under control? And we would laugh about it, when something, like the English say, did you sort it out, right? Is everything under control? And that was what she'd say. Don't worry, everything's under control. And so I'm taking this book. I've made a 30-minute opera out of it. There's a theater here where I had a play last year, and not last year, it was pandemic, it was 2 years ago, where they asked me to turn Ladysitting into a play.
Wow. And
I have a note to myself.
That was some undertaking. Wow.
Yeah, it was. Oy, yeah. I have a note to myself to put in that phrase. Is everything under control?
Right.
Because I used to answer her and say, no, Nana, nothing.
Right.
Nothing's under
Nothing's
control.
in control. We are losing it everywhere.
Everywhere, every day. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, you had a phrase that you used in the book. You said nanitude, and I wrote it down, and I'm like, that's just freaking awesome. That's it. That's great.
Yeah. That
Her stubbornness and her ferocity, and yeah, she was a feisty old broad.
She was. She was feisty when she was younger too.
Well,
But
I'm sure she had to be.
Yeah. The other business about control was Nana had 2 husbands. She divorced the first one and was very unhappy about that. And she stayed with Papa, but it was not. It was a cold marriage. We enjoyed both of them. Both of them were great to us. I had great fun with Papa and didn't realize until much later that he was not my blood grandfather, because he seemed like it, right. He seemed great, but they didn't. When he died, now speaking of death and birth, so a book about dying means you tumble in. It's like you open the drawer and look at all of the other deaths you have experienced, right? Yeah. Nana, we were there with her after Pop died. We stayed with her while the undertaker came, took his body out, did the things you need to do, had his body cremated. And I answered the phone at the house one day, and it was the funeral director saying that, please pick up the ashes. Because Nana said, I'm not going there. I'm not picking up those ashes. She said, I did everything. I took care of him. I didn't. Right. So his ashes were in our house for a good while.
In a cardboard box or something, right?
That's how they give it to you.
Yeah.
It's in a box. There is a sealed thing inside, thank goodness. But they were in our basement until my sister and I got together and made a service for him. Asked my priest at my church, and we spoke the words and we did the prayers, and then we found a place to inter his ashes. And that could be tough,
Yeah. I mean, I think most of us need rituals around deaths. We need rituals to help us get through the whole grieving process. Yeah. I think they're important touchstones so that we feel like we have some measure of control, to sort it out, or what was Dana's phrase, is it all handled? Yeah, after my mom died 8 years ago, and it was a really tumultuous, like the last 18 months of her life, we didn't talk at all. And she was an opiate drug addict. It was a disaster. And nobody would eulogize her. Her husband, her sister, her best friends, nobody would eulogize her. So it was either I figure out how to say something loving and respectful after our relationship just blew up 18 months prior. Either I figure out my way to this very quickly, because in the Jewish tradition, you have to be buried within 48 hours. So I had no time to dilly-dally, or she wasn't going to be eulogized. And no matter how bad our relationship was, how could I just dismiss her whole life by not saying anything? I mean, it was I didn't know where to begin. I was so angry and so disappointed and so grief-stricken, not really because she died, but because she died before we could resolve anything, before we could make amends, before I could get the mother back that I remembered from when I was a little girl. There was, I was longing for the relationship that I wanted, and that was no longer possible. As long as she was alive, even if we weren't speaking, there was some possibility, however small it was, Ay vey. I looked through like 70 years of photographs so that I could remember her, force myself to remember her as the beloved second grandchild of my great grandparents. So I could see her smiling and laughing in other photographs and remember her when she was young and thin and beautiful, and, you know, see her with me as a baby when she, you know, was cherishing me in her arms and so
Yes.
on, and sort of obliterate for at least a while all of the more current harsh images of her. Because
the fact is that those images sometimes obliterate the other.
Of course.
So you're trying to do an evening or changing or moving or something that is useful to the community.
Right.
Because you're born alone, but you're born into a community. Mm-hmm. You die alone, but you also die from a community. Right. And all those things are so difficult and so important.
Yeah, and it wasn't just that I had to say something about my mom because it was respectful and caring of her, which it was, but it was also important for me, at least I felt it was important for me to say something that would help, as you say, her community in their grieving of her.
Yeah.
Like what can I say about her that would help them remember her as the quirky, generous, open-hearted, loving person that she used to be, rather than the addicted person she became. And so I focused on those memories and the things that I learned from her, if not by example, at least the cautionary tale, you know, like, yeah. And good, bad, or indifferent, it worked. It was.
Yes. You know, the other thing is, if you were teaching a creative writing class, which I do, yeah. One of the things you would do is say you have to do that in order for the reader to understand the magnitude of the loss.
Absolutely.
So that's what was lost to the addiction.
Right.
And so first you grieve the quality of life, and then you grieve the life. But you can't grieve any of that until you see what it was that was lost.
Yeah.
And then people can then people can get to their own loss, because sometimes you can't get to the loss because you're stuck on this ledge.
Right.
You know, that is, yeah.
Interesting.
And for me, I think writing the book was also part of that. It was so that I could honestly think about the loss, you know, in a way that was specific, articulate, and also useful. One of the things I'll never forget, Yusuf Koumenyako's an amazing poet, right. Talked about how a poem should be of intellectual and emotional use to the reader. Somebody's asking, when is it finished? And if it's not of intellectual and not just either or, but and emotional use to the reader, then it's not finished yet, because maybe you've said what you need to say, but if it
but you haven't said what the reader needs to read.
Right. So that's when you write it in your journal and you leave it there, because it was important for you to write, but not for someone else to read.
Right. And I think that's precisely what memoir writing is. You know, you're taking your own story, your own journey, your own experiences with your interpretations and sharing them with somebody else, because it's through story that we reach empathy and catharsis and community and healing, you know,
and find meaning. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Stories are meaning making. Is that right? Sounds weird.
Yeah, it does. I think they sometimes they make meaning, sometimes they capture it.
Yes.
Yeah. I think sometimes there is me. I mean, for me, it feels like there is meaning, and I have to write until I find it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that with any
Right.
creative endeavor, it's that way. You know,
As opposed to making it. It's not like, oh, this is chaotic and I'm so wonderful, I've made meaning of it. No, I think there's meaning there.
right.
And I have just sort of crawled on my belly up to Broad Street to try to find it.
To try to find it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been journaling since 1983. So I sometimes I write and I no idea what I'm going to write about. I just keep writing. And then sometimes I've written and then I go, what the hell did I just write about? And I read it and I'm like, did I just write that? Like, I don't even remember how that came out of me. You know, these things just, or I'm also a painter. And so there are times where I start a painting and I just stop because it stopped speaking to me, you know, and I just have to wait for it to open its mouth again, you know, to communicate to me what it wants to be. You know, I think any creative endeavor, I think, has an air of mystery like that, you know, where it's a give and take. It's a cyclical thing in some weird, magical, mystical way.
It does have magic and mystery, but it also requires so much discipline because for me, and I think writing's different from painting. This for me, I just have to write and write and write, and I throw away a lot. A lot. So, you know, because not every insight needs to be seen.
Sure. Might be worth it for you to read, but not everyone needs to read it. Right. Or be too personal, or for you to be 100 reasons why certain things get shared and certain things don't.
But it is what we are doing, it certainly in memoir and it's like blues, you know, you do take, speaking of permission to heal, you take life, including its pain, and not exclusively, but including it, and you try to make beauty of it.
Right.
That's the alchemy.
Yeah. For me, it was very sense making. Like I was trying to figure out how my mom's experience in her life, which also encompasses her experience with her mother and encompasses my grandmother's experiences with her mother. So we've now gone back 1, 2, 3, 4 generations. How does that all play into who I became, or what kinds of behaviors or templates for relationships or ways of thinking about myself, my own self-identity? How did all of that sort of occur? You know, like there was a good portion of my life, primarily my adolescence and my early 20s, where I think I was sort of wearing a big V on my chest for victim, you know, like I felt like it was all this injustice and I felt victimized by my mom's bipolarity and her drug use and whatever. And I was in therapy, but obviously not dealing with the crux of the cause of all of my suffering. Like I wasn't mature enough to, or ready enough to deal with any of that. And I didn't deal with any of it until after she died, because I didn't know the depth of where it lied, whatever, slept. And so the process of writing my book for that reason, I started out just as a lot of journal entries, like how I was dealing with all of that. Where did that happen? Trying to unravel the history of all of that and figure out how to heal, so that I'd stopped the toxicity from going to the next generation.
Sure. Which is a great gift.
Yeah. And yeah. Okay.
And so the writing is part of it, but I think all of your activities, so you asked me about activism.
Right.
And I hadn't thought, I felt a need, and it felt like a calling to do various kinds of civic engagement, here in my own Philadelphia. So I started a
You've
Black
got an
art.
art group and you have a voting group,
Right.
vote the yawn or something, right?
Vote that John.
John.
It's a
John.
Philadelphia slang, John.
John, right.
Jawn, Jawn, which means whatchamacallit. It's an undifferentiated noun. Like,
Okay.
Give me that. What's that? Give me that John over there,
That
please.
who's it thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Who's it? What's it? Right. And as the rap song for the group says, if you would promote that John, then vote that John.
Right.
So it's just talking to 18-year-olds, 18 to 24-year-olds who are very active, very passionate. I mean, I don't know what older people say about them. It's not true. Things matter to them a lot. They give as much money, percentage-wise. They have less money, but they give as much money, percentage-wise, as older people. They give time, even though they're in school and working, and they give time to charitable actions. They are out protesting stuff that matters to them. That's excellent. But to get them to connect that activism and charity to elections and elected representation, that's a different matter. Sure. So all of this is getting young people to write social media posts and Instagram and Facebook and all that kind of stuff, as well as to create art and online activity for other 18-year-olds that talks to them about voting. And we're not talking about voting for somebody. It's not for a charismatic, candidate. It's not for a platform. It is
just for involvement and civic duty.
You vote for your John.
Right.
Yes. And the thing is, those young people who come out voting in their first possible election tend to vote more regularly than others for the rest of their lives. This last election in Philadelphia, the young people 18 to 24, we had more register than before. We didn't have quite so many as registered in 2008, but almost. Okay. 2008, because they were interested in Obama.
Sure.
But we had many more come out than we usually do for an election where there's not a charismatic person that they say, we want, we all want that person. Sure. And those who registered, 70% voted. That's excellent. 4% more than older folks here in Philadelphia. 66% of older registered voters came out to vote.
I don't understand why that isn't a larger percentage.
I don't understand.
I vote. When my kids were little, we used to have voting booths with curtains and we could take them inside. I used to take them inside and let them push little things down and
that's right.
Crank the curtain thing. And, and they used to like, Mommy, why are you crying? And I just voting to this day brings me to tears. I find it a very moving experience.
It is.
How many millions of people have suffered through all sorts of indignities and have gone to war and so on, just so that I have the right to go into a voting booth and say what I need to say, make my opinion known. Yeah. I think it's, as an American, I think it's, as a citizen of any country that has the right to vote, I think it's the most sacred act we have as citizens.
Well, the thing is to get to find ways for young people to tell that to each other.
Yeah, they're not going to listen to a 53-year-old me.
Yeah. Well, some of them might, but a lot. But it was a fascinating. I started I teach creative writing at University of Penn. So that group, that class acts as an editorial group, and then we connected to high schools, other college groups, all kinds of groups. We had a wonderful woman, Beth Feldman Brandt, who was running a a foundation here in Philadelphia that funds people in the arts. She was on sabbatical, and she said, let me help you with your kid. Well, she knew all the arts groups, and she said, does so-and-so know you're doing this? Does so-and-so? So she connected us, and one group called the Big Picture Alliance. They did a wonderful film about the young people. Nice. That was great. It got out to that group. There was another group called Spiral Q, and they make life-sized puppets, and they do parades and people. Cool. They made the puppet they made for us was a mailbox that you could put on and sort of dance in the mailbox.
Right.
When they brought it out, we were on the street, we had dancing puppets, we're registering people to vote, shouting at bus drivers going by, beep, beep, people are waiting, etc. Mail person, a post office woman came up and said, I like that. She started dancing with the bus. It was, so, and I'll never forget, during that particular afternoon, a man came by with two children. Mm-hmm. The kid, and kids, of course, were stopping and enjoying this whole situation. And one of the people at the table, a young woman, I think she's a graduate student at the education department, she said to him, excuse me, sir, are you registered to vote? And he said, no, I can't vote. I'm sorry, I can't vote. And she said, no, you can vote. And he looked at his kids and he said, I was incarcerated. I can't. And she said, it's Pennsylvania. Are you out? Are you on parole? Are you off parole? He said, yeah, I'm fine. I mean, I'm working. She said, you got your vote back. And he grinned.
Wow.
He was a citizen again.
I got chills, Reed.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was all that, like day after day after day. And you add those things up. Mm-hmm. And yes, we were on the 60 Minutes did a piece, and yes, Vice did a piece, and yes, there was Nightline, but for real, on the street, one after another, like stealth culture change.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
Yeah, beautiful.
Beautiful.
So that connected me back to Bill Higgins.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's in your blood somehow. It's in the DNA,
I guess. Although I think probably it's the other side, my mother's side, probably too.
Well,
yeah.
Still, intergenerational activism.
That's right.
I love that. Okay, so let's finish up with the 6 quick questions, if you are ready. Okay.
Yes.
So what 6 words would you use to describe yourself? I'm asking this to a creative writing teacher.
I should have read these and thought. 6 words.
Supposed to be spontaneous. Just relax. There's no wrong answer. Just
relax. I'm not relaxed, actually. Not relaxed. I am passionate.
Yes.
I have spiritual. They're just words. We just want adjectives, right?
You could be nouns, could be verbs. That doesn't matter.
Working. I'm loving. Still growing.
Excellent. I don't think we ever get tired of that. Yeah, I think that's 6. Yeah. Sounds good to me. Yeah. Yeah, so many guests were doing adjectives only. And then I had some guest a long time ago start to use nouns and verbs. And I was like, that works really well. I like that. That's awesome. Okay, number 2, what is your favorite way to spend a day? Or one of them?
At the beach on the Jersey Shore. Just drive down before sunset and watch the sun come up over the Atlantic Ocean.
Beautiful. Any season in particular, or it does not matter?
All seasons. I go there all seasons, all weathers.
Yeah.
All seasons, all weathers.
I
Or
prefer the beach in the winter,
Forge,
actually.
or out to Valley Forge. And it's just about that half-blood moon is coming, but in September and October, the harvest moons come.
Beautiful.
We go out to Valley Forge, which is one of the few places near Philadelphia where you can see from one horizon to the next. Because there's so much old, there's building everywhere and there are forests everywhere. But this is one of the few places it's just rolling hillsides. So I love to go there and walk.
Beautiful. What's your favorite childhood memory?
My favorite childhood memory comes from, is a permission to heal memory completely. And it's my first luminous memory. It's of, I'd gotten a spanking, I'd had my drawers were down. I was standing there with a bare bottom with the face into the corner. I felt so ashamed, so horrible. I almost left my body, almost.
Wow.
And I heard a voice that was a woman's voice that I now realize is very like my own voice. Older woman saying to me, and my mother had said, you're going to thank me for this one day, and one day you're going to do this to your own kids. And this voice said, don't worry, you won't have to. You won't. It's all right.
Wow.
It's all right. Because that was the fear. She said, don't worry, it's all right. You grow up and you will never have to do this to your own children.
That is astounding.
That was my luminous moment.
You were like reparenting
Luminous,
yourself
rather.
when you were still a kid.
It felt to me like the voice of God. It felt like an angel. It felt like, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Or gift. It felt like a spiritual gift that I had been given that gift to hear that voice, wherever it came from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. What did you get? Some measure of comfort from that at that point?
Great comfort. Great comfort. It said to me, go ahead and grow up. You don't have to worry about how this movie will end. And one of the things there was too much violence when I was growing up.
Yeah.
It was, in my own little body, in the house, in our friend group, on the playground. There was gang warring in my neighborhood. There was the war in Vietnam. There was all of the crazy assassinations that made me think grownups and America had lost its damn mind. Malcolm X, John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, like boom, boom,
One after the other, after the other. Yeah.
One after the other. There were newspapers showing pictures of US soldiers shooting in the newspaper, getting ready to assassinate people, human beings from Vietnam. It was like a snuff at it was all of that. And it was as if that voice said to me, you will not have to bring violence into your most intimate relationships.
Very powerful.
That's what I wanted to know.
Yeah. To come out of all of that violence into a peaceful life.
Is it possible?
Yeah.
And yes, there has been violence in my life, but
not in your immediate family.
I don't, right. The idea that the only way you can get people to do what you want is to hit them or hurt them. It may be the only, but that's, and
it's
you
an
don't
older
have
world sensibility. I think a lot of the older generations felt that way. We are a little more enlightened. Can I say it that way?
But you know what? I'll tell you, when I went back to the African Methodist Episcopal Church, looking to their newspaper, just looking for facts about enslavement and slave and free, there was someone who wrote, and I actually quoted it in a book of mine about the time called The Price of a Child, 1848, I think it said, and a man wrote, rather a woman was quoting a man who said, I do not hit my children because the world will hit them enough. And I want them always to look back on the table that they sat round, and remember a place where they received love.
Beautiful.
Only. That was, he wrote that in the 1800s. And he was an African-American man who had endured slavery, who had he saw violence like I ain't never seen violence.
Right.
So people could make and did make that choice.
Profound.
Yeah.
Very profound. Okay, a little levity. What is your favorite meal?
Oh, but I love food so much. There's so many favorite meals. Oh my gosh.
Pick one.
Pick one. All right. From the time I was a child, my favorite meal has always been chicken and rice. Now, I now eat mostly vegetables. So, I would add salad and beans or something to that. I just made, before I came up here, Greek chicken lemon soup with orzo.
Oh, I love that. Love that. It's one of my favorites.
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't just hand you some, right?
Oh, that'd be great. Through the Zoom. I go from Greek restaurant to Greek restaurant whenever I go, and I order the chicken lemon soup because everybody does it differently.
That's right.
And I like some better than others, but I love them all. Oh, I need to find a recipe or invent my own or something. And
my daughter got me started making it. She said, "Mommy, it's really so simple." She said, "It's broth, some orzo, you shred the chicken." And then she said, it's a couple, 3 eggs. You just, mix them in with as much lemon as you like. My recipe said 3 tablespoons. I usually use the juice of 2 lemons for a quart of broth. And a woman who was the designer for my play said, the thing is, you got to have great chicken broth. She said, more than anything, you just make a good chicken broth.
Do you use a container of broth or do you make your own?
Okay, if I'm rushing, I use a container.
Yeah, I've never made my own, so there's no judgment here.
You can also use a container, and in the freezer, I always keep the ends of celery, carrots, and like the little ends that you can't use that are still good. Yeah. And then in the broth, I put in my own parsley, carrot, or you can put in fresh, Sure. Do that for 20 minutes and it takes your broth, it makes your broth feel like it's died and gone to heaven. Yeah.
I do that when I make matzo ball soup. I start with the broth, but then I add in my own, dill. My grandmother was a big proponent of dill in matzo ball soup. So there's dill and there's some carrots and I don't do onions anymore because they don't like me.
Celery?
Yeah, some celery, some pieces of shredded chicken, and then eventually the last thing that goes in there are the matzo balls themselves. So Great. I might have to make some tonight now that I'm thinking about this.
Now that you're thinking about them. I've never made
if I have broth.
Soup. I love it. I always order out because I'm always afraid to make the matzo balls.
They're so easy. You need a little oil, a little egg. The package directions on the matzo meal has the proportions. I never remember. And you whisk it together with a fork with the matzo meal and you put it in the refrigerator for 20 minutes. And the secret is wet hands. So you put your hands under the cold water faucet and then take a little bit of the matzo meal mixture and roll it. But what you're going to make like skimpy little balls, because when they hit the boiling water, pop, they become much bigger when the matzo meal absorbs the liquid from the broth. Yeah. But the trick is to keep wetting your hands. Otherwise it just makes this sticky, mortary sort of mess.
That's what, yes, you have completely described what I was afraid of. And it's something that I've never seen. I didn't grow up watching it.
Right. You have to wet your
hands.
hands.
I love it. And once when I was in hospital, my daughter, who was in New York and couldn't get away, called our favorite delicatessen here to deliver it to my hospital room. So I have it as a healing thing.
That's wonderful. Yeah, my daughter's up at college near Boston, but in a northern suburb of Boston, and she was sick. It was like a month ago, and she just had a cold and a little fever and nothing terrible, and she was doing all the right things that I would have done for her had she been home. But I wanted to make my daughter soup. How do I get her soup to Massachusetts? So I'm on like Uber Eats and I'm looking at all of the meal delivery services, and I finally find a restaurant that's close enough that sells a matzo ball soup, which unbelievably hard north of Boston. I don't know why. And I said, okay, now how do I do this? If I have a meal delivery service bring you food on your campus, are they going to be able to get access? Because the campus gate's locked unless you can swipe in. How are they going to get in? And she says, it's really not worth the struggle to get the matzo ball soup. I love you. Thank you so much, but I'm good. It was this compulsion. Jewish mom has to fix,
Yeah. Well, my daughter didn't say that. I got the not matzo ball, but chicken soup to her, and she didn't say no.
Well, she wasn't on a gated campus, I'm sure.
No,
I mean, that was the difficulty, having to get past. And then because I'm not really letting people on campus who don't also belong there and have not vaccines and masks.
No. This was in the before times.
Yeah, it just adds a whole lot of mess and difficulty to something that should be simple, but whatever. We'll get past this, and whenever that is, and we'll all be good. All right, 2 more questions and then I'll let you go. What one piece of advice would you like to give your younger self?
Don't be so hard on yourself.
Profound. Yeah. I think we are all too hard on ourselves. Yeah. Well, maybe not all, but a lot of us. The ones of us who are awake are. If you're awake. Okay. And what is one thing of all of the things that you would like to change about the world? If you had the power to make something go away, what would you change or add? Doesn't have to be a takeaway. It could be an addition.
Right now, the one thing I would change is fossil fuel for climate. I would I would just roll it back. I would just roll back. If I were king of the forest, I would get science to say what we actually need to do to roll back climate change. And then I would have it done.
Yeah, I think that would be the one thing that would save millions of lives.
Yeah. And I think in the process, wonderful other things would happen. Right? Because if we, it's like when you sleep well, eat well, exercise, meditate. Look at this. Your skin gets better. Yeah. Your relationships get better. Like if you handle the body, handle creation, what we've been given, then other things that we're thinking about that we're also, because we're interested, we want to make money, we want to have status, we want to have power, we want to do this other stuff. But if we focus on the body of the planet, other things will be much, much better.
I couldn't agree more. What a great positive way to end. Thank you so much for being here. This was so much fun. I was looking forward to this all week. It's really great. Thank you so much. Right. And for those of you who are listening, if you're not driving, please don't do this right now. If you're driving, scroll down on the show notes and you'll see all manner of ways to find Lorene and her books, and get yourself a copy of Ladysitting and the audiobook and the paperback, and check out all the amazing stuff that she does. And it's all going to be linked through the show notes. So yeah.
And in a week or so, we'll release the remastered opera, 30-minute opera about Ladysitting.
Oh, beautiful.
With new captions. It'll be on my YouTube channel. We're still working on the captions and the sound. And so that's coming up within a week or two.
That's awesome. So I'll link your YouTube channel to this also, so that when this comes out, we can see all
Great.
of that.
Oh,
That's
thank you.
awesome. I'm so excited. I can't wait to see that. Thank you so much. This was so
Thank you.
beautiful. Have a
Thank you.
good evening. It was so wonderful to see you.
You too. Good night now.
Good night. Now don't go anywhere. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Permission to Heal. I hope you found it moving and inspirational. Please remember, you don't need anyone else's permission to trust and follow your heart. You have the power within you. Subscribe to Permission to Heal so you don't miss any new episodes, and please share this with your friends.